If you want a brain rest, Serious Sam is definitely the less cerebral of these series. It's a bit odd that I've played not one but two first-person shooters this month, given my usual predilections, but here we are. Serious Sam first released on the PC in 2001, so it's old. It's an old game. I first played the PS2 reimagining / port in 2004, which, for Fact fans, was designed and directed by Sam Barlow of Her Story and Immortality fame. Very strange place to get a start.
Yeah.
And then I later played the HD remaster of the OG game on the Xbox 360, which seems to be a big thing this episode, in 2010, and when it came out on kind of the Xbox Live Arcade. This month, I boosted up the PC version of this HD version, these days known on Steam and other platforms as Serious Sam, The First Encounter. And I had a good but extremely mindless time shooting things. Like, I don't really know what else to add. It's one of those that's like, that sums it up, to be honest. There's not a lot to say about this series, at least in its core sort of canonical timeline, because Croteam from day one were very overt about it being a game that would hark back to the speed and viscerality of classic shooters like Quake or Doom, way before it was cool to be doing so. Because today, like if you look back the last decade or so, you can't move for so-called boomer shooters, with even Doom taking a leaf out of his own 90s book, eschewing all of the survival horror stuff that was in Doom 3 and just going full steam ahead with over-the-top action and speed in the 2016 reboot in Eternal, and later this year, The Dark Ages. You know, they've just lent into that big time. But in the early 2000s, we're talking just after Half-Life and things like that, with games like Quake waning popularity, for Croteam to develop a game like Serious Sam is actually quite novel, because Serious Sam's contemporaries were games like Red Faction and Halo. So a predominantly single-player shooter with virtually no story outside of shoot the things, extremely brain-dead AI, and a walking speed that would make sprinters blush ended up, you know, a relative cult hit because it was a bit different. Playing in 2025, the game is fun. It's fun. You know, level design is what I would call expansively linear, because stages always just have a single path, but it feels more open than it actually is by virtue of them also being very wide, and the default field of view feeling like gargantuan. Now, there are little secrets here and there that you can dig out if you want to, that can encourage you to deviate from the main path a bit, but rewards are usually just more health or more ammo. So your mileage to actually seek them out is going to vary depending on what difficulty you're playing on, how into it you get. Firing weapons does feel good, which is a positive thing for a game about firing weapons. There's a nice range of the usual shooter fare. You've got pistols, dual pistols, through shotguns, through rocket launchers. All of them do the job. They feel beefy to fire, and they make the big monsters be dead. Again, it's a game about shooting things. It's worth mentioning that most of your adversaries in Serious Sam as well are actually less intelligent than even the first Doom, because back then enemies would react both to you, the player, but also to one another, which lent the game a bit of enemy management strategy, especially in big groups on higher difficulties. In Serious Sam, though, a huge number of enemy types literally just run directly towards you as soon as they establish line of sight. And the game leans into this, admittedly, by making a lot of the baddies like headless blokes. They're just guys with bombs strapped to their hands, and they operate essentially as just kamikaze warriors. But still, it feels like the game sometimes takes, for better or for worse, the most bread and butter approach to level design, to enemy encounters, and just to the general rhythm of play, because it is just enter room, shoot things, leave room, and that's how the game operates. If you're semi-decent at circle strafing, that's you sorted for the duration of your playthrough. You know, you enter a room, you keep your sights trained on the mob in the center as you sprint round the perimeter like a speedy crab, you rinse and repeat, and that's Serious Sam. And there is nothing wrong with any of this. You know, I'm on record as loving the simplicity of old arcade games like Space Invaders, and you could argue that games like Serious Sam are perhaps the clearest lineage to that sort of very traditional scrolling shoot 'em up in terms of like mechanical design. But the key here, I think, is that a game like Space Invaders is by its nature limited in aesthetics and design and mechanics, and as such, you kind of know to meet it on its own terms. You know, they're addictive score chasing games, they're a test of gradually rising skill, but once you've seen level one, you've seen it all. And by the 2000s, some 30 years post Invaders, that level of simplicity perhaps didn't always cut it, especially when games like Half-Life and its brethren were attempting to push the form by introducing like properly contiguous lived-in spaces that became the backdrop for layered environmental and direct storytelling, as well as shooting, which Serious Sam just doesn't. It just says, here is a gun, here is an enemy, and you can figure out what to do with that. That's all it's going to give you. There's nothing else to share, which again is fine until maybe it gets a bit boring. But it's all down to what you want from a shooter. I don't think you can play a game like the first Serious Sam and not have a decent time, but you can absolutely play a game like the first Serious Sam and think, I think I need a little bit more than this now, even when the game is as transparent in its setup and design limitations as this. Like, it's not pretending to be anything else. You just have to be in the mood for this, and then it will deliver entirely. It does what it does. Maybe the Serious Sam franchise improved or changed over its next 3 entries and indie helmed spin-offs, but they're kind of outside of the scope of this review, at least for now. I didn't have 500 hours this month just to play every single entry, because there's a fair amount of them now, but it is what it is. So I think we could say Croatia don't have that many notable studios currently making games, but they do make pretty good games, and they can certainly kind of do a job in 2 quite different fields within the first person genre, as it were. So I guess that's a thank you and good night from Croatia and Croteam.